Hey everyone, welcome to Group Text. Well, we know my sweet spot in life is true crime. It's like my happy place, which is kind of a problem for my therapist to solve. Anyway, we are in for a treat today. With me are Dr. Burgess and Abigail Fuller, whose fascinating new docuseries, Mastermind, To Think Like a Killer, begins streaming July 11th on Hulu and will certainly give you your true crime summer fix. Dr. Burgess, the subject of the series, is a pioneer in the field of behavioral sciences whose research helped the FBI catch some of the most notorious murderers. Easy for me to say. Whose research helped the FBI catch some of the most notorious murderers and rapists in the country. Abigail Fuller is the director of the docuseries, and I am lucky to have both of them here today to answer so many questions. Ladies, welcome to Group Text.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, anyone who knows me at all knows, and my mother was too, like true crime junkies. Like one of my mom's big exciting moments, and she met everybody in her life, was meeting Anne Rule. Like we're sickos. My writing partner one year for my birthday gave me the Encyclopedia of Serial Killers. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's amazing. Abby, your whole face just lit up. Like, really? Yes, it does exist.
I am very impressed. That's awesome.
Yes. Well, it says a little something about me. But so I binged the whole series and absolutely wanted more. Can I call you Abby instead of Abigail?
Yeah, Abby. Yep.
Okay. Abby, you give us a look into how Dr. Burgess revolutionized the process of solving crimes through profiling. So what made you want to make this documentary and tell this story?
I mean, Dr. Burgess is an incredible, obviously her career is incredible. She's incredible. She's still going. And I think honestly, when I first spoke to her, what she did with profiling the behavioral science unit is incredible. And I was a huge fan of Mindhunter. So I was familiar with the story. But it was when I first learned about her work with Linda Holstrom in 1972, where she published the first study that said that there's such a thing as rape trauma syndrome. I realized, how is it that, 50 years later, this is something that I'm not aware of. And I realized that as you peel back the layers of Dr. Burgess's career, she's constantly at the forefront of saying, let's believe victims, let's understand the victim's perspective. It's changed the landscape on, a number of fields. And I felt like this is such an incredible story to tell, and nobody's heard it before. So I was very proud to be a part of it.
Were you a true crime aficionado before this? Because like you were watching Mindhunter.
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting that I think one of the reasons or maybe, I don't know, gave me a call about this series is that unlike many other filmmakers who do true crime, this was my first series in this space. And so they thought maybe I'll have a different perspective or an angle on the genre because there had been so much true crime coming out. So I do like true crime. I watch it for fun, but I'm definitely not as like steeped in the culture or the genre as many other filmmakers. And so I really thought of it as less of a true crime series and more of Dr. Burgess's story and all of the ways that she's touched culture.
Well, it very much so. And we'll get into that when we discuss the whole process and how you approached it, because it was very an interesting way to tell multiple stories at once and had a very cinematic feel. But Dr. Burgess, you've had this incredible career, and we'll get into sort of the timeline of it in a minute. But I mean, I can't believe I'm going to say this. It's one thing to get a call from the FBI and say, hey, can you help us out? But it's another thing at this time in your life where you think to yourself, that they're still interested in me, and like, wow, someone wants to tell my story. What was your reaction when you got the call?
Well, you mean the call on the series or the call?
Yes, on the series. Yeah. We're going to get into how the FBI called you and you were the only woman. We're going to get there. This is more about how did you two end up together?
Yeah. Well, to get this call for the series was amazing. It really was, because I never really thought of it in those terms. You were in a career, you're not seeing it as a career, you're just seeing it as work to be done. And so it gave me pause to be able to say, wow, I'm going to have to go back and think about what has happened over the years. There are a number of years to go back over. So that I found very gratifying, to be able to get things out that maybe never would have been said before. So I really saw it as an opportunity, not only for me. My story is how nursing really moved forward and took over an area that medical professionals had really abandoned and didn't want. And it shows that is the big story, that we have a network that goes, every state has hospitals, every state has crisis workers, every state has nurses. And this is a nursing phenomenon. That's what really I was happy to be part of, that Abby really started.
Okay, let's roll back to the very beginning. You were originally going to be a nurse, and what you guys talk about in the series is that was one of 3 careers open to a woman, basically, at that time. And you picked nursing and had the very traditional family sort of master plan, which you achieved. And then all of a sudden, you kind of did take a left turn. What piqued your interest in the very beginning? Because you started out by working with rape victims and helping change the culture of how these women were looked at. Because at the time, was it the early 60s? They were still like, oh, they are dressed like that. Of course they, want it. Or was it the late 60s kind of time?
It was the late 60s, and it was Linda Holmstrom that was going to these, what they call consciousness raising groups. And these were groups where women would get together and talk about things they never had. This was not something that women did. They usually just stayed in the home, did the traditional thing. But there were women now that were beginning to question and to move out of the home, if you will. And so these groups were really, really important. And what were they talking about? They were talking about rape, and they were talking about incest, and they were talking about sexual assault. These were taboo subjects that women didn't. And Linda knew Boston had one, New York had one, and they were then networking. These were just networking. And she said to me, do you want to be part of it? She said, it's going to be important for women. And Linda was an associate professor, as I was, and said that she knew that this was going to be big. I didn't. I was just doing my own thing in nursing, and I wasn't as aware of the social meaning. And so she really educated me, if you will. And I didn't realize at the time, but she wanted to study rape victims and talk with them, and she couldn't find any. And so they were really silent. They still are. It's very hard to find rape victims. They are a silent group. We have not made headway at all in that area, and we haven't made as much headway, certainly in the legal systems. But back then, I said, well, we've got to go to a hospital. That's where they come. I'm sure that's where we can find them. And that's actually how we started the project.
At the time, you're right. This was not something that was ever talked about. And one of the ways that the story is told, which I love, is, and it opens with, Abby, you open with Dr. Burgess' children talking about mom would come down, feed us dinner, and go back upstairs, and you hear tap, 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 tap. We had no idea what she was writing up there. And I think that really sort of conveyed your outlier way of thinking so early. And identifying problems so early, which then led you to publishing a book that caught the eye of this very sort of emerging, budding department at the FBI, which eventually became the Behavioral Science Unit. How did you explain to your husband, who is like amazing through all of that? He needs a documentary as well.
Indeed. I would like to make that one as well.
Yeah.
The other Dr. Burgess.
Exactly. The other there we have the title already. What do you say to your husband? Like, I got the strangest call today. Like, should I follow up on this? How did you even explain the call from the FBI that you got to him, let alone your kids who had no idea that their life was become literally a traveling circus.
Right, right. Well, I had to tell him because I was like going to get down there, well, I guess I could take a plane, but he was building computers while I was taking care of rape victims. I mean, that was and the kids didn't necessarily, they knew more about the computers. You could talk about computers.
It's hard to go to your kid's school and they say, this is my mom, she's a nurse. And by the way, she's also studying serial killers for
Right.
career day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that was essentially it, but they didn't really know that. So in the beginning, to get the call from the FBI from Roy Hazelwood was a scary thing because I didn't know what's the FBI calling me about, and when they ever said they wanted me to talk about the study I was doing, I'm thinking, I hope it's okay to, they're not going to get in any trouble. So that was an important decision to go down there. And because it's a very unusual place to visit. You travel and travel and travel and finally, like Brigadoon, it pops out of nowhere. So that was important to see what they were doing with rape. And I will hand it to Roy Hazelwood, within a short time of working with him, he had changed the title of his course from sex crimes to interpersonal violence. So he really got it. And that was a major, major breakthrough. So now it opened up not only from the rape standpoint, but into some of the domestic violence. So they did well to move on this because we're talking the late 70s, early 80s.
It's fascinating the way the story is told because it's very cinematic and I don't want to give it away, but the passing of time, Abby, how you walk us through that is so good. And I don't want to give it away, but cinematically it's wonderful. The first time you walk into the FBI, you look around, you're literally one of 6 women at that point, maybe. Yeah. And you get into an elevator and they take you not just to the basement, the sub-basement. You walk into this room of men. They had called you. How did you get them to listen to you?
Well, the way I got them to listen to me was to show some actual cases where what the trauma was all about and to get their attention because there was some snickering. I knew that there was some behind the scenes stuff. I knew that I was talked about before I got there because there weren't even 6 women there. I don't think I saw more than one. And that would be someone that was a secretary probably doing all the work for all these men. But it was all men. And it was years before they started getting female agents to come in and were part of the class. So it was to break through that was not going, I knew was not going to be easy. So I just would talk about the cases because they understood cases. They did cases. So I had plenty of cases because we had done 146 cases by that time that we had finished the study on victims coming into Boston City Hospital.
You obviously, and I can tell you command a room. So you force them to listen in one way or another. So at the time that you joined, Ressler and had started interviewing serial killers, but without any kind of methodology. And you were basically brought in to listen to all these interviews that were so completely scattershot and almost more like rambling conversations to create, I don't want to say a handbook or a checklist, but of things you needed to ask so you could actually get the information and start being able to build profiles. The first time they put the headphones on you and you start listening to these guys, it had to be chilling.
Well, it was both chilling, but it was also amazing because they had access to incredible data. Now, I put my researcher hat on, and you're always looking for data because that's what you will analyze. And so listening to these tapes, I thought, my golly, they really don't realize what they have here. Because they just thought they would just sit down and I say, how are you doing your interviews? And they said, well, we're just getting them to talk. I said, just getting them to talk. Well, they got to do more than talk. You got to ask them something. And they didn't know what they wanted to ask. They just thought that an interview meant talking. So that is what moved into the methodology of you had to have the same questions asked to everybody that gets interviewed. And the first task became putting together a 57-page color-coded. We wanted to color-code it so they would know which color to do, and start collecting data. What amazed me is they could say at one of our meetings, gee, I would say, if we only could get access to their criminal history, or we could hear their psychiatric history, it'd be on the desk the next day. It was incredible how fast they could get something because they were the FBI. So they had a lot of power in terms of collection of data. And that's what impressed me. Again, from the research standpoint, I said, you really got something here that needs to get out.
I would think, though, the first time, did you ever go home and just go, oof? Like at one point, as much as we all try to separate, and especially which we'll get into some of the crimes involving children, you're a mom. There had to be times that you went home and just wanted to not necessarily weep, but stay in your car an extra 5 minutes and catch your breath. I mean, and Abby, I assume when you went back and were researching all of this and you put clips of the interviews in the film.
Yeah, just being immersed in the subject matter for the process of, talking to Dr. Burgess, listening to the tapes myself, and hearing the cases, it definitely, has an impact on you. And I think that, Dr. Burgess is, she's such an empath that's part of her skill set. So it's really powerful, that she's able to hold space for victims and the family members of victims, and do it time and time and time again. So there's something special going on, though, that she's able to do this in such a profound way and then move on to the next case and, continue to help.
One of the things that's shown is you have a very profound and particular style of listening. And you were going through all the transcripts and you were marking things that were important. What makes something jump out at you?
Well, what makes it jump out for me is I'm learning things about the offender that have affected the victim. So I'm listening with that ear in terms of, that is why she had the reaction she did. So I'm learning things that then I can help the victim with to explain. See, one of the things the victims had is, why me? Why is he doing this? This is such aberrant behavior. And so that's where they would tell me things. And so I was collecting information from that standpoint that I could then use. And I think that's what helped. The other thing that's important is we're trained in nursing to be able to keep separate, because you see a lot of very, very tragic kinds of cases. And so you can't get into the emotional reaction. It isn't until, as you said, at the end of the day. But we were getting so many cases, it was like I didn't have time a lot to think too much about the cases, if you will, the emotional piece, as much as I got to get the work done and find out, what are we learning, what can we use, and how can we interpret it. So I think that those two things helped me.
One of the stories that you share in the documentary is learning from one killer. One of the reasons he had issues was because he something about his mother not kissing him on the forehead. So you went home that day and grabbed your poor son and just planted a run right on his forehead. And Abby, I love the fact that you left in that he was like, why'd you do that? Like, what was that about?
I did. No, I did. Yeah. You're right. You're right. I was so happy that my little son was not going to turn into a serial killer. I wonder if he didn't. So, yeah, he tells that story.
It was so cute. Your work really started to take over the family structure. And to make sure that everyone could still stay together, your husband learned how to fly so that you could all go as a family together to Quantico. Now, My parents never learned how to fly, but they had the same thing, which is if someone's going to be gone for more than 2 weeks, the whole family goes. Until there was a certain point that A, I didn't want to go, which is probably when they should have made me go so I wouldn't get into mischief. And B, once you hit a school age that you really can't. I want to know, because he seems so lovely. Honey, I'm doing this. I'm learning how to fly. So basically I can drive you to work.
Yeah. Right. Well, he loved flying. So, that was no hardship for him to have to learn how to fly. And he loved it. And the kids loved it. But don't forget, they had to work. They weren't just going on a vacation. They had to work down at the academy. We had things for them to do. And I think they talked about some of this on the that Abby got on film.
But I love doing all these interviews, by the way, with, because we learned so much from Dr. Burgess, but she stays focused on the work. And then it was great to get the whole picture from talking to Alan and the kids and kind of realize how integrated everyone was in this whole story. And like she said, everyone kind of contributed and had their own stories to tell about their experience with serial killers and Quantico and, Wrestler and Douglas. And, it was really a family affair.
Yeah, which is one of the things I found fascinating. I also love that we do get to see you in what I assume is your home. And it's a very gracious, lovely, very traditional home. You're not sitting there drinking out of a mug. You have your proper coffee cup and all that. And then you put on your other hat and you're dealing with the worst of the worst. Right. And Abby, I love how you showed both sides of Dr. Burgess's personality, because I do think that's one thing that probably kept you sane, that you went, and I'm paraphrasing, I know these are not the correct words, crazy to normal. Like you went to work and dealt with crazy and you came home and were able to ground yourself in normal. Did you realize that what you were doing, or was it just the way you were raised, that you come home, you do this, you do that, and still have that tradition? Because my parents had the same thing. Our home was very traditional, and we sat down for dinner every night and turned off the phones, and it was no longer the entertainment business. And to the day my mom died, I still had friends that called her Mrs. Rosenberg or Mrs. R, not by her stage name.
Right.
And I felt a kinship towards that. Was that by design or just who you are?
Well, I think in a traditional home, if you were brought up in a traditional home, that's what you did. You had rituals, you had things that you had to do, times you had to be, and it kept a good semblance, if you will, of it kept any of the emotion that might be going calmer. And dinner was important. You talked about things, how the day had gone. You go around, everybody was in school or something like that, and would talk about that. I would not talk about what I was doing. I would say that I never talked about the cases. The person I talked to the cases about was my father.
Really?
And he had to listen to all of those cases because I didn't want to interfere. I didn't want it to interfere with the way the tradition and relationships were going. So I did separate out who I would talk to about the cases.
Carol, who's featured very briefly couple times in the series, is another incredible trailblazer who is a friend of Dr. Burgess's and another nurse. And I think she was also another person that you kind of used to talk about the cases with, so that you didn't have, you had a way to decompress.
Well, I used Carol as a supervisor. She had the knowledge on some of it. She helped me interpret some of these things because she had been grounded in more Freudian kind of theory. And so she served in that purpose and was very, very helpful. Anytime I especially had a victim where I just couldn't make sense out of what was going on, she would help.
Your first big case was the ski mask rapist. It was the first one that successfully used your profiling techniques. How did that feel when you got it right?
That was wonderful. The getting it right was important because it was a test. We hadn't proven the program, and so they needed that. That was really good. There are a couple that really made it. The Simonis case, John Barry Simonis, he had been going for 3 years had multiple cases all through 12 different states, multiple kinds of assaults. And so it was, he wanted to be he wanted to beat the FBI. That's what it was all about for him. So solving that one was really, really important. And then the other one was the Jean Joubert case, that made the congressional record. And that was really, really important from the FBI standpoint. That's something that I guess is written every day. And Bob Ressler got he had done the profile. He had done the profile on the first little boy that was murdered, and then the second one. And the whole community was getting frantic over it, as you can imagine. So they really had to go full stop on solving that case. So you're absolutely right that they had to be able to prove that that worked. In some way it worked.
Those same techniques are still being used today.
Oh, yes.
Which, to me, it just, I'm always so fascinated by people whose thought and process and thinking create something that they can't really build the better mousetrap. That this is the best mousetrap. Are you often wonder why they haven't really been able to find a better system? Because now our world is filled with do it faster, do it better, do it differently. Here's the shortcut. But you created a system that there isn't a shortcut. Do you ever look at that and realize, obviously at the time you don't know what you're doing, but you were so forward thinking that no one yet has been able to build the better system?
Well, I think Abby captured that.
Yes.
In one of that. I don't know how much she wants to talk about that, but we do have the technique. We're hoping to use artificial intelligence in what's called machine learning and topic modeling. And that's where we're going next, because you can analyze a lot of data very quickly. It doesn't take weeks and months like it has had to in the past. So that, I think, she captures in the docuseries. And I think that's going to make a huge difference, I hope, in catching them sooner.
And continues to be a family affair on that one too, because her granddaughter, Alex Burgess, is also leading the charge with her on that project, which is incredible.
I love that you're, it's one thing to go into your parents' business, but when your parents' business is what you did, you're always like, wow, that grandma must have told some really interesting bedtime stories that you're like, ooh, I want to do that. One of the things I loved is it's not sensationalistic, where it could have been made that way. How did you decide which cases to focus on?
Yeah, well, there was a few to choose from. We're talking about 50 years of cases. I think the ones that Dr. Burgess was the most emotionally invested in, whether it be the victims in Louisiana that she interviewed or working with Opal Horton, those were cases that we really wanted to discuss because she was in the field working with victims, and that's core to, like you said, her superpower, or something that she's able to bring has a lot to do with the active listening. And then beyond that, it's the cases that were these milestones, where something changed, where they're able to prove that profiling works. It's not just woo, it's not just this little project in the basement that, a nurse and some, the outcasts are working on. No, this is actually data that can be, it's a model that can be replicated. And so Simonis case fit perfectly with that. Obviously the Jean Joubert case was major. And then we also wanted to look at Dr. Burgess's career post BSU. And that's why we looked at both Menendez and Cosby, because those are cases that most of us know of, but we didn't know her role in it. And again, she's at the forefront of thinking differently about victims. And with Cosby, we see this great full circle of where she started with Linda in the 70s. And to see someone who's high profile, who never would have been, held accountable then, to see a victim believed and find justice towards the end of the series felt really, really beautiful to show.
One of the things with the case with Opal, who who's a young girl who witnessed her best friend, 7 or 8 years old, witnessed her best friend being kidnapped. She had gotten grabbed herself. She got out somehow. And the last time she saw her friend was her friend pounding on the window, screaming her name. You went in. It's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Dr. Burgess, you went in and had the idea of, let's just color. Let's just color. What gave you that idea?
Well, that's what 7-year-olds do. I tried to put myself in what is something that would make her feel comfortable. So clearly that was something that we would do. And I got the parents' permission. I had to laugh. The FBI agent said, well, we don't need to get permission from the parents. I said, oh, yes, you do. We don't do anything with children without getting parent permission. So in a way, I'm telling them, because I was angry that they had waited so long to call me on that. They had nobody that would interview a 7-year-old victim. And I thought, why wouldn't you? So they had a deficit there that they shortly had to correct. But at any rate, so the drawing was, do you do it in school? What do you do? What do you like? And just getting her comfortable with that. I had checked with the parents that that was something that she would do. And sure enough, it's unusual that a child would not want to draw pictures and at least feel a little relieved they aren't going to have to sit and talk to this adult. So it worked, and the pictures were very instructive, gave us good information about him. They even were able to draw a sketch that they could then put out in the media for that. And it was 10 days into the abduction. And if only we could have gotten it earlier, who knows? But at any rate, and it also introduced the FBI agent, Candace DeLong, who had her own wonderful career and still has her career, to be able to work with Opal when they found Missy. And she used drawings. And that's what Opal wanted to do. She wanted to make a drawing for her friend Missy, which she did, and she was able to. The other thing with drawings is they can take some with them. You keep the ones you want to keep, but you can send something home with them. And I've often, when I've used it, have been able to pull them back out years later and show the children now grown up what they had done back when they were so young.
One of the things you also touch on in the photo of the whole unit is popping into mind. All these men are standing there like, yes, we've done this. And no one thought to put you in the picture. Did it even cross your mind then that you should be in the picture? Or do you think that's just sort of how society was? Because now someone would take it as an affront. At the time, did you just go like, oh, well, that's normal? Because, your brain was working beyond where you were in actual time, but you were living in a time that had very different, rules for women.
Oh, yes. Very different rules. But don't forget, I was a consultant. I wasn't an agent.
So you never had your own ID.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that's so ridiculous.
Yeah, you have to take that into consideration.
It's interesting too. I'll just comment on that. Whenever we spoke, Sarah Kalin, who's featured in the documentary, or any of the younger women, they were all kind of outraged by this idea. But Dr. Burgess, I think there was just, not to speak for you, but I just got the sense that just having a seat at the table felt groundbreaking.
Yes.
That the idea of needing to be the one getting all of the attention and, on the newspaper cover, magazine cover, that wasn't the focus. The focus was, helping victims and having a seat and a voice in that process. And beyond that, it wasn't what she was focused on.
Your career very much transitioned through the years. And you talked about drawing pictures. You were brought in by the defense in the Menendez case.
Yes.
And you used your technique of drawing pictures again, but this time with an adult. Why did you think that was going to work with an adult?
Well, I was using it with adult victims. I was using it with, I had moved from just children and would call it sketching. Can you sketch what happened rather than can you draw what happened? And I said that this would help us go back over it. It was a wonderful technique to go back and forth with the drawings, and you could pull out one and say, well, yesterday you drew this and now you're doing this. So you could even confront inconsistencies, which was going to be a big issue, we knew, if there were such things as that. But I had used it with others, and in fact, we tried to use it with the serial killer study, but the agents weren't comfortable with it. So that didn't work. I think and they would not draw the crime. So we learned that, which was interesting. Whereas look at what Eric Menendez did. He certainly did. So I thought that was really quite interesting.
It was interesting because it led to the hung jury, famously.
Yes. Oh, yes. That went by gender line,
Yeah, and that was fascinating. But then, unfortunately, it wasn't allowed in the second trial. Do you have any contact with either of them anymore? Because it felt like in the documentary, like in the interviews, it felt like you bonded almost, or he bonded to you because you were listening.
I know that I haven't stayed in touch with the attorney, Leslie Abramson. And I know that when they were trying to get a sample of Eric's handwriting because of the new development in the case, he thought that I might have one, and they got in touch with me. So from that standpoint, yes, we stayed in touch.
It's so fascinating, just the whole thing. But one would think you might have decided, wow, that's enough. I've developed a new field of science and all these things. But no. You are still teaching. What are you doing now? Because you clearly have not taken a step back.
No, you don't take a step back, take a step forward.
What do you do for fun? Forward. What do you do for fun? How do you decompress?
Music. I love music. That's one thing. I walk my dog. So I have ways that, I watch television. I love shows.
What do you watch?
I like talk shows.
Really?
Yeah.
Any good, I'm a true crime junkie, not fun for you because you know how it all works. But what are your favorite talk shows? Like, I love watching Jeopardy. I love watching, Below Deck is my only reality show. What talk shows do you like?
I still stay with what's current because I teach. I have to know what's going on in the world. So I do watch a lot of news so that I can, if a student brings up something, I can deal with it. So that I do have to, my time is limited as to what I can watch. But I would say I'd have to fall into that. But some of these current blogs I really love.
I did hear, Dr. B, that you were a fan of Murders in the Building.
Oh, that was, yes. Love that show. Yeah. So
such a good show.
Yes, thank you. That we do love. We watch it as a family, actually.
Oh, nice.
Let's see if we can figure out. That's when we go to, every January, we go down to Disney.
Oh, and so you have the one adult granddaughter. How many grandkids do you have total?
11.
How do you just said we all go down in January. How do you handle 11 grandchildren? Just Christmas gifts.
Well, do it. You have to do it. You can't not do it. They yell at me if they pick on me if I do it. Yeah. Picked on.
You go on Amazon and say, I'll take 11 of those.
Well, no, I make them give me lists. No, they have to do some work. They don't get a gift if they haven't put it on the list.
That's tough. That's tough.
Dr. B definitely loves the holidays and the decoration and the Christmas sweaters, and there's no holding back. So she somehow she has time for all of it.
So, what are you working on next? Because your style of storytelling is very unique. What are you working on next?
Well, I do a number of cases. I have a limited number I can do, so I keep up with cases because I need to do that so that I stay as current. So that involves trials. So I'm back to, now that COVID is over, we're back in person in trials. And so that's important. And of course, the teaching and all of the current cases, there are a lot out there. The big one that I just learned something about was the one out of Maryland. And I think it's come out, I don't know if it's true, but it's come out that he stayed in the area. That's very unusual. We would have suspected that he would have left the area. Now, whether that is true, but there's a good example of where we will want to find out more information if it turns out to be the suspect. So I keep up with that. And of course, teaching, I have very large classes so that I have to stay pretty current for that. That's my life.
What is the one case that doesn't leave? What is the one case that you just still, sometimes for some people, it's something they couldn't solve or something that they missed something. You know, I know when I look back at my career, there's certain decisions I made that I go, I don't know if I would have made that decision again. What is the one thing that you look back at and say, the one thing that sticks with you?
Yeah, it would have to be a case that we didn't win. Those are the ones that kind of haunt you a bit, as well as the ones you can't solve. They had those, done at the academy, and they don't get solved for 20 years. I mean, a lot of those cases never give up. We're doing cold cases, and that I've switched from let's solve them to why is he getting away with it? What is he doing that's getting away? And trying to see, it's always going to be a systems problem. Something in the system isn't working, not the offender, it's the system. So there are always those, but as far as any cases, I don't think we have any that are out really high profile cases that haven't been solved right now.
But which is the one, it doesn't even have to be high profile,
Oh,
that sticks with you?
the six with me. I'd say there are several. The ones that have stuck with me have been ones that I couldn't necessarily explain or get it across to the jury. I have to work hard with the attorney to get to what do we want to get to the jury to help them understand. So those are one of the biggest areas now is, of course, in the nursing home cases, that they just think that because the woman has, or man, I have male and female cases where they have a dementia and they want to say it doesn't matter. I think those are the ones that bother me the most, or with children. Oh, well, she'll outgrow it. It's not a problem. So how do you counter that? Those are tough ones. And I certainly have a share of those.
Abby, which one did you not put into the documentary that you wish you could have?
You know, Dr. Burgess has been working on this really incredible study around missing and murdered Native American women that we documented some of it, and you see a little bit at the very end in the epilogue. But, you know, hearing those cases and also the research that she's doing made, that really stuck with me. There was one case, right, where even a woman was killed. They took her baby. She was how many months pregnant, Savannah? 8 months pregnant. And what's the word, Dr. Burgess, for
the Graywin case?
The Graywin case, but there's like a specific word for when you actually
the fetal abduction case.
Yeah, fetal abduction.
Yeah.
So those cases were shocking, and also just really, I think, they're not high profile, but it's in such large numbers that it felt like that would have been incredible to be able to tell more of those stories.
Those are hard cases because women are involved. Women are the ones that are doing these cases as the killer.
Really?
Yeah, that's what, in fact, I'm teaching high school students this week, and that's the case we have tomorrow, is the Graywin case. Because we do a simulation where the students have to go and figure out what the case is. I don't tell them beforehand. They have to figure it out.
Why do you think you're seeing a rise on women committing these much more violent crimes?
I think it has to do with the culture. I think that there are things that are changing. Any culture has ability to change, and I think that is what's not creeping in, it is in, and is giving them rise to this.
Do you think
It's
we're ever
not big, it's not a lot, but these are very troubling cases. I mean, they're all troubling, but these are really how they can do it is the big question.
do you think we'll ever see a true female serial killer?
They've had them. I have a slide on that. They're not well known. There was some woman way back in
Aileen Wuornos, the one that
Well,
Charlie,
yeah.
that one, monster.
Yeah, I mean, her motive was pretty clear.
Yeah.
But these others, but they're not many. You're right. They're just not many. It's not something that women think about or do.
Interesting. Abigail, what are you working on next?
You know, after doing this project, I wanted to do something a little bit lighter. So I got back into working with chefs for a little bit, which is a lot of work that I've done because I love food. So doing a series for Masterclass, and then actually bringing it full circle. I actually am headed to Disney World next month in July, which is probably a mistake, but
yes, Florida in July in Florida is just, you know, for someone who's talented and clearly smart. Wow.
I know. So headed there, and then we'll see. I think I'll be ready to take on another series like this one come fall.
Dr. Burgess, other than everything you have going on, what is the next challenge for you? What do you think your next, because you're not going to stop working.
No.
What do you think your next, I want to say, what are you doing next? But what do you think your next personal thing other than going to Disney is going to be?
Well, I think the next thing is the AI is, I want to see that advance. And so Alex and I are plotting and planning what we can do to move that forward.
Well, this has just been such a treat for me. Mastermind, Think Like a Killer, streaming on July 11th on Hulu. It is a must see. Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so wonderful. Thank you for having us.